Hello, and welcome to Hard Hats and Hot Topics podcast brought to you by calfordseaden. I'm Dr Christopher Marien, partner and head of MEP and sustainability here at calfordseaden, and we're here today to discuss one of the most significant issues currently affecting the housing sector, damp and mould. I'm delighted to be joined by Charles Hingston from our Building Surveying team, along with Dave Hughes, Design Director at Fuse Architects. Welcome, David, Charles. Could you each tell us about your roles and how it relates to damp and mould?
So, Charles Hingston. I'm a building surveyor partner at calfordseaden, and I head up the building surveying team in our Orpington office, mostly covering southeast of England and London. And we are actively undertaking damp and mould surveys for various clients and are witnessing firsthand the problems that residents and landlords alike are incurring on a day-to-day basis.
And Dave Hughes, Design Director of Fuse Architects. We're architectural practice based in London Bridge, and we do a lot of social housing. Our background is 95% social housing, and a few years ago we started looking quite a lot at social housing decarbonisation fund. Retrofit works for existing properties for social housing under the SHDF. And then I think on the back of that, we've really gone into all aspects of retrofit. And obviously with Awaab's law coming in, there's more and more interest in what's happening with damp and mould and retrofit relative to that. So we're qualified retrofit designers and various bits and pieces. So we're very active in that space from an architectural point of view.
Excellent. Well then, David, perhaps you're the one to kick us off then and kind of give us an overview.
Yeah, let me talk a little bit about Awaab's law. I'm going to get my laptop open so I make sure I get all of it all correct. Awaab's law was brought in, officially came in October 2025, so recently. It's been talked about it for the last couple of years. So Awaab was Awaab Aishak, who was a 2-year-old who died really sadly in 2020 in Rochdale due to a respiratory illness. And that was caused by prolonged mould issues and mould exposure in the social housing flat they were living in. Social housing landlords, or all landlords, have always had a duty to address damp and mould issues, but what Awaab's law does is it puts it in law that they have to follow certain things now. So it's a set of legal reforms. I'm going to read this out under the Social Housing Regulation Act 2023. So it imposes stricter legally enforceable duties. There's 2 phases. Phase 1 came in October 2025, and that covers damp and mould. There's another phase later on, which is, and no one ever knows the exact dates, but that comes in and that looks at other hazards. And it basically aims to stop cases where tenants are suffering. So it's quite a strict process what happens. And so let me read this out so it's really clear. So first one's awareness. So when the landlord becomes aware, usually through a tenant complaint, of a potential hazard, this triggers the clock. Yeah, and this is what's really new about this, is it used to be that they had to go and investigate, but what the law does, it embeds certain timescales now. And so when the landlord becomes aware, or, and this is an interesting bit that we'll talk about a bit later on, I think, or should be reasonably aware. And so, getting a complaint's an easy one. I've got damp and mould, it triggers the clock to go and have a look at it. But they should be reasonably aware, and maybe we'll come back and talk about that a bit later. So once they get that awareness, they have to investigate within 10 working days. And I'm going to talk about, there's 2 sorts of hazards. One's a significant hazard and one's an emergency hazard. We're only going to really talk about significant. If it's an emergency hazard, lots of other things kick in to do with 24-hour responses and stuff. And you guys will experience this. So there's now has to investigate within 10 working days by a surveyor. Now, and again, we'll talk a bit about this. Some councils, some registered providers, some social landlords have in-house surveyors, but lots of them don't. And I think the thing that they're all really just beginning to wake up to is, who you're going to call kind of thing. calfordseaden Ghostbusters. It's sort of like, we've got 10 days to investigate. We kind of need to, I think, as an industry, get into this, having a group of people that are ready to respond to that reactive 10-day period. So the surveyor goes off, and then they have to provide a written summary. So in that investigation, they have to provide a written summary to the tenant within 3 working days of concluding the investigation. So basically says to the tenant, this is what we found. It's a significant hazard, X, Y, and Z, yeah?
Yeah. What are there any what's the kind of enforcement around that if they don't do it within 10 days? Is there any information on that? Yeah, where it's going to be a fine?
I don't think there is yet. I think because it's so new, it's, I think that no one's tested what that's going to be yet.
So from what I understand is that the law is going to enable residents to take their landlord to court if they don't action it
Within that period.
Within that period of time. And that's the point that is now changed, is that it's legally enforceable, that residents have got this action from their landlord.
It's right to do it, basically,
Absolutely.
this complaint.
Yeah.
Interesting. So then if they find it, the landlord must make it safe within 5 days. Now, making it safe could be a temporary measure, including moving them out to temporary housing, or it could be a quick clean up, the guy with the spray and washes it down. But also within that 5 days, they have to have a plan of permanent resolution of the problem. So they have to either start the work within the 5 days, or they have to say, we're going to do this sort of work. And it has to be completed within a reasonable time, and certainly within 12 weeks. Say it's super complicated, I think you can say to the tenant, look, we physically can't do it within the 12 weeks, because we've got a project at the moment where we have to take off an external staircase because the staircase goes through the wall and the staircase is concrete and it's cold. So we've got to take the external staircase off and then do a new staircase with a thermal break. And that's going to be more than 12 weeks. Yeah. So I think it's okay when that...
Absolutely. And I would agree that, the view that we're taking from calfordseaden is that as long as we do that first survey and we're flagging up to the landlord, you've got this problem, it needs to be dealt with. The clock is ticking, whereby it either has to be actioned or the landlord has to move that resident out.
Yeah.
So yeah, like you say, it doesn't have to be 100% resolved within that time period. It's just as long as there is obviously action happening.
Yeah. And that action is communicated to the tenant. So the tenant then has a sort of legal right to say it's not being actioned.
Absolutely. And I think that is the key as well, is the communication.
The sort of significant change from last time round is much more that they have this legal right now to do something about it rather than just complain.
Yeah, agree.
Yeah, interesting. So then you've got to do the work within that period of time. And so it's a very strict timescale, and it's very, quite rightly quick timescale, because the whole point is to do it. So it'd be quite good to hear from you guys about what Calfords are doing relative to what you're finding in the surveys, because what we're finding with a lot of ours is councils either have a surveyor but they're under-resourced, as all councils are with, and RPs are with these things, or they don't even know who to call, So, and without that first piece of information, there's not very much we can do, really. So that's a sort of quick whistle-stop tour of what Awaab's law is and why it's really become quite important to what we're all doing. Yeah.
Okay, then. So, Charles, you and your team being surveyors and the kind of forefront of this and big kind of hitting the ground and doing these surveys, perhaps you can give us a bit of insights to what you're seeing and what kind of inquiries you are getting through from housing providers and then what you're seeing on the ground.
No, absolutely. So the commissions that we're receiving are generally blanket instructions. We know we've got damp and mould in these properties. We need you to go and investigate why those are. And with all damp and mould, it develops through high levels of moisture, through potentially lack of ventilation and potentially lack of heating. So that is the crux of our survey, is to assess those things and build up a picture of why that mould is growing, why that dampness is in the property. That could be from leaking pipes externally, leaking roofs. It could be from a leaking pipe internally, ventilation systems that aren't working properly, and that sort of thing. And some of those things are really easy to visually see when you're on site. Other things that can also generate mould growth is through what's called cold bridging, whereby you have a solid material that faces an external wall. That cold can then be drawn into the property, and that would create a cold spot within the property for condensation to form and mold to grow. So those are slightly more complicated, but as a whole, we're generally seeing a lot more of the simple things, which are through lack of ventilation and leaking pipes.
So you finding, yeah, I mean, I know I'm not going to put you on the spot about a percentage split, but it is things having broken and therefore leaking rather than necessarily a fundamental design flaw in the way it was built in the first place.
Absolutely. It's probably as much as 90%.
Okay.
Is things that are generally very straightforward to resolve, and inexpensive for a landlord to resolve. And so our approach would be to look at the simple things first, address that ventilation if we can see that fan perhaps isn't big enough within that bathroom. And then if that doesn't work, then we need to start looking at other long-term solutions that might include the whole building. But obviously we can talk about those a little bit later on. And then, sorry, I was just going to say as well, just leading on from that is our survey and reporting mechanisms. We've got some software now that we are developing with a provider and developing ourselves in terms of sort of what to include within the software that we can input onto an iPad or similar while we're on site, so that we can then very quickly generate a report to enable us to report back to our landlords within the required 24-hour time.
Yeah, because time seems to be the key to all of this. So in the current kind of approaches you're getting, is it very much this kind of next day approach from housing providers, or are they still kind of working on a bit more of a lead in? And what kind of information do they have available on their existing stock? Or is this literally, here's the street, here's the type of block it is, this is what we need to investigate?
Yeah, we're finding that the information available can be limited, and that's not a problem for us, because in some ways we want to go there with a fresh pair of eyes, with no expectations. So it's it's easier for us to take that approach. Yes, we are getting requests for delivering reports within short timescales. We're not generally getting them requested for the 24 hours, but things like legal disrepair cases, that's very much time-led activity. We need to report back for the legal process in the same sort of way.
But isn't that the key distinction here? I mean, the 24 hours is going to be the headline grabbing kind of part of it that everyone thinks, oh, I've got to respond within 24 hours. But I think, David, what you were saying, it's very specific cases, 24 hours, more of emergency.
Yeah, and well, if it's the complaint comes in and if it's considered a hazard that is an emergency, then it's a 24 hours. But a significant heart hazard would then be the 5-day period, and the vast majority are significant hazards. It's just interesting on the fact that it's so much of it's reactive because of this thing of, do you find that social landlords are waiting for the complaints at the moment because it's become so new? They're now all running around a bit saying, oh my word, we've got all these things coming in.
So yes, it is reactive, but it's then prompting complete stock condition surveys throughout the whole estate. So we might initially be asked, go and have a look at these properties because we know we've got damp and mould issues there, or reported damp and mould issues. But then from that will then lead on to full stock condition surveys throughout the whole estate. So yeah, at the moment it's firefighting, and then the next step for them is the stock condition data.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so then we kind of talked about the law, we've talked about kind of what we're seeing on the ground. What are kind of practical solutions then moving to this, or resolving the issues, and taking Charles's point around, there's a vast difference in what the causes can be, but taking the more kind of simpler solutions in terms of the key issues. How do we practically help our housing providers solve these issues quickly?
Yeah. So from a mould point of view, because that's the sort of the crux of what we're aiming at, is that you can very simply go into a property and clean off that mould with a a solution, but that is a short-term fix, but it will relieve the immediate problem that a resident might have.
Do you think there's a particular danger here almost of housing providers taking that kind of approach, particularly if they become under pressure, that, well, we'll go in, we'll clean it off, the complaint goes
like
away.
Greenwashing, but mold washing. Yeah, no, I agree, yeah.
And then wait for the next, few months' time, next complaint, do it again.
But I think you have to, with the evidence of what happened to this young man, and potentially other cases in the future. It wouldn't be right for us to say that don't bother cleaning that mold off because it's only going to come back in a week's time, and we'll give you a long-term solution, but it's going to take us a few months to get that sorted.
Yeah, I imagine your surveys anyway, the process you follow means that you're almost you are an independent assessor. So if you say, well, you can clean the mold, that's a short-term solution, but the underlying cause of that mold is X,
yes,
it's then written down and you've submitted that report to them, they have to do something about it, don't they? Yeah. And I think, again, that's probably the difference, the quality of surveys, because we're now following a very specific process, and you guys, got this really good way of doing it, I think, of really being able to show how that process has been followed. Rather than, I've got a complaint and someone goes in and just gives it a wash.
So this is how this law is really going to impact what people do, whereas before it may have just been cleaned off and gone right done.
And I wanted to ask about resident behaviour, because I think, again, residents sometimes are unfairly blamed for some of this. I think we've all heard the stories of, because they didn't open the windows or whatever it may be. But it does. Do you come across that? Is that a real thing, or is it unfair?
So I think there is some education that can be done to help alleviate situations. So there are extract fans that you can have that I've seen installed in bathrooms, for example, which are on 24/7. They just have a very low background. Extraction, but then they'll kick in when the time when the humidity, absolutely. But some people think that, oh no, that fan's on, that's draining my electricity, that's costing me X amount a day to run that, and I could, over the course of a year, I could pay for lunch one more day, because that's how difficult it is for some people. So but then there are other things that you can think about with washing, for example. That's another one that often comes up with people drying their clothes on areas. And you could argue, well, where else are they supposed to dry their clothes?
That's what could have been.
But if they're going to dry their clothes, they need to open, or there needs to be some ventilation. Yeah. So is the current ventilation system sufficient? Is it fair to ask somebody to open a window when it's -5 outside?
Yeah. And I also I suppose this for you really is that do you think sometimes we've been a bit too smart? That we've not actually thought through the MVHR or the constant trickle, the constant vent. It's a classic of we can all sit there and say this is really brilliant from a physics point of view or from an engineering point of view, but actually the person on the ground is used to just a little fan that clicks on and off.
Well, I think this is part of it, and you're right to say that blaming residents definitely isn't the answer, but it needs to be part of the solution to educate and inform them, particularly in existing buildings. So I think we are, as an industry now, used to modern new design buildings where you can effectively design out the issues either through good kind of building fabric design, or, as you say, kind of mechanical and electrical ventilation systems that are automatic. They have humidity sensors. We've got heating systems such as underfloor heating where you have a base temperature all year round. Most modern buildings do hold a good temperature all year round, so you're going to have very limited issues, and really the residents don't have to even think about it. The house lives and gets on and creates that comfortable environment for them. Whereas in existing buildings, unfortunately, no, they do need a bit more interaction and kind of manual interventions from the resident. And we always say no one wants to have a relationship with their thermostat and have to go home and think about it every day. But unfortunately, there is going to be some key elements to that. So as Charles was saying there, all those kind of thinking about what you're doing when you are washing, when you are cooking, and that needs to be part of the conversation. And actually, West Kent Housing Association Association have an excellent video on their social media page that talks residents through those different kind of key interventions they can do when they're doing certain activities. And I think that just needs to be part of it. And I think, as an industry, we need to recognise again that not every house is new, that actually trying to then re-implement these kind of modern technologies into existing buildings is very complex and tricky. And while there are technical solutions to it, the residents kind of have to buy into that again. And Charles made an excellent point there around fuel poverty. Because many of these residents, if they're in a housing provider's home, the likelihood is they are suffering from fuel poverty as well. So there's probably a link there with kind of link to funding and help on support with fuel costs, etc. So residents can keep their homes warm. And maybe, a lot of the instances I'd imagine is where it's in a colder room because they don't want to heat the whole house for exactly that reason. But it's that kind of education around, keep the house at a base temperature. And it should not resolve, but it will definitely help mitigate.
And I suppose there is a trust as well that we as an industry probably need to get back to. If you've lived in this house and your complaints have been ignored for all these years, and then we come in and say, by the way, open a window when you want to dry your washing, and they're just going to go, I don't care what you say, quite frankly, because you've not listened to me for all these years. So I think there's probably my hope is as we do. I think that as the industry's now woken up on the back of Awaab store, but on social housing decarbonisation fund as well, as we wake up to the fact that 80% of people live in existing stock that needs work, and it's been ignored's probably too strong a word, but the investment hasn't been as good as it has been for 25, 30 years. The people will see things happening more and more, and then hopefully we can start addressing some of those things, I would have thought.
Yeah. So maybe that moves us nicely on to kind of the pressures that housing providers have, because as you touched on there's a whole host of different pressures coming through to housing providers, such as fire safety. From our perspective, trying to upgrade EPC levels, aiming for EPC level C by 2030. There's the decent home standard, etc. So where do you feel that registered providers are going to have all these pressures, and where do you think damp and mould kind of fits into that, and how can we get maybe a holistic approach to the way we're doing this?
Are you finding any holistic approaches from clients?
No, none that have been introduced to date. There's obviously lots that they can do, but it's not happening yet.
Yeah, we're similar. We found a couple of clients who are beginning to look at their planned works programs and say, well, actually, as part of that planned works programs, why don't we get a survey for damp and mould and a survey for EPC and try and do all that work together? I think this, what it comes back to for me, is the Awaab's thought of reasonably, you should reasonably know that there might be a damp and mould issue. At the end of the day, if you have a lot of stock, accepting that a lot of the problems are because of broken things, but then if it's all built at the same time, lots of these things are going to break across lots of the properties. We're doing some work with Welland and Hatfield, who are being very much, if a complaint comes on an estate that was all built at the same time, they then say we really need to look at that whole estate, because the fact we've only got one complaint, we are almost 99.9% sure going to get another one and another one and another one. So actually, let's do that. And whilst we're there, why don't we talk about doing some external wall insulation for the EPC stuff or whatever else it may be? And that's got to be the way forward, right? But am I being too optimistic here?
Well, it's very practical, and probably slightly optimistic. But then that goes back to what you were talking about earlier, that funding arrangement and the people and the skills they have in these providers. So maybe that we talked about residents' education. Is there an element there that actually housing providers do need this kind of education as well, so they know what they're looking for when they are going to?
But also, when you think about all of the issues that we've been picking up during our surveys, it's not very common to find a block of flats where every flat has got the same problem. And so there's no need for them to look at an estate-wide sort of program of a particular type of repair or improvement to those properties. But where we have had that, ventilation systems seem to be a solution that the client has agreed to and seems to have been successful. A mechanical positive pressure system blowing air into the property, vents in the critical rooms, which will open when the humidity reaches a certain level, and that enables the airflow that's required through the property.
And is that a simple system? Is that an easy retrofit piece of kit?
Yes, it is.
So similar to installing a fan, you just happen to go the other way and then have a little vent that opens when it reaches a certain level.
And quite often with these estates where we're finding that sort of problem, there are already vents installed in those rooms, which at the moment are making those rooms cold, which is almost making the whole problem worse again.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a vicious cycle, unfortunately. Whereas with a mechanical system, the vents will only open when the humidity reaches a certain level.
And are they easily maintainable? I think this is the other thing coming back to my. I always worry that we're sometimes a bit too smart, and we again come up with these fancy ideas in our offices, and then say, well, in 10 years' time, someone's got a MVHR is always my favourite of having to change the filters all the time. So, but again, is it maintenance simple issue?
Sorry to pass the buck, Chris, but I think that one, this one might sit better with you. It's a great system that's been installed.
As you say, it depends on how kind of smart you're making it. But you're right to point out MVHR. But again, I'm sure if we went back in and looked at the amount of MVHRs in new builds or being retrofitted that had the filters cleaned, and again, it just comes back to education. I think from a long-term perspective, they are low maintenance. Fans are very reliable now. They are low cost running. And again, I think that comes back to the education to the residents. Say, no, this is here to help you. Please don't switch it off. But they're all reasonable solutions, but they're quite intrusive solutions as well, because you are working with an existing home. You're having to retrofit that in. It may not be possible always to get it directly onto an external wall. You may have inbound rooms that you're having to work in, particularly bathrooms, etc. So it can be quite intrusive for the resident. And I think that's another challenge that providers and surveyors and engineers like myself and indeed architects have to try and deal with and take people on that journey, because we are in people's homes, disrupting their home quite a lot.
Which comes back again to this, maybe it is utopian ideal optimism of a bit like the digging up the road 3 times in 3 months. Let's just do it all in one go. The residents are going to have the hassle, let's face it, but at least if we're doing it whilst we're doing their kitchen and their bathroom as normal planned works, doing some decent home standards, doing some EPC improvements, then it's a one hit.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting for us to talk about it, and it's something we really should be talking more and more to the RPs and the councils and any social landlord about trying to get some joined up thinking going.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think we're pushing an open door. I really do. I think on the back of Awaab's law and also the SHDF stuff, we're getting calls from people from asset managers or asset directors of RPs who are saying, can you come and help us, because we are pushing an open door. So I have the hope that it will happen. Just coming to your point about residents then, I suppose then that's about making sure that the contractors are educated as well on some of this stuff in how they work on these things.
Yes, definitely, because as we've all experienced, and probably as Charles has pointed out earlier, we can design lots of solutions in, but ultimately if they haven't been installed or commissioned correctly, then you're going to have the ongoing problem. So it's an excellent point to pick up. There's not just kind of us three in the room as designers. There's the whole contractor element of this, and having appropriate skilled contractors and commissioning engineers, which we know we're struggling with as an industry at the moment. So yeah, an excellent point of where are all these people going to come from to be able to deliver these retrofits and upgrades, particularly if as a result of this law, quite rightly, more people are raising these issues and we're trying to solve them quicker.
And is that something calfordseaden do? Would they do that EA sort of PM checking role?
Yeah, it's very much of what Charles is team do is
So as
see
well
the
as
project
surveys,
through
then
all to the end, and
interesting.
that's the benefit of having a multidisciplinary company where we're able to support them on the kind of inspecting of the mechanical and electrical sides. And as you say, when you have this kind of more joined up thinking and you have a larger scale retrofit and even decarbonisation to an extent, you're able to implement that through. So seeking the right consultants with the right support, I think, is critical.
And I suppose, for you, Charles, that's what's really cool, is that you've got this process that starts from at the moment reactive, but hopefully, as we talk about this more and more with people, proactive. You do the survey, you really follow this process that's very transparent about how it's done and how you communicate it, right to the end of we've now gone back and checked on it and it's met what we said 12 weeks ago.
Absolutely. We've got experience now of seeing the installation of some of these ventilation systems, external wall insulation, that sort of thing, and running the projects on site, acting as contract administrators or employers agents on design and build projects, and right through to completion with our clerk of works support as well through the construction phase. So yeah, we're in a good position to help roll this type of work out where it's needed. But we are very mindful of not trying to specify a one size fits all solution, because every building, every situation is going to be slightly different.
That's probably a lovely place to finish. So thank you, David. Thank you, Charles, for joining us, and thank you for listening to our Hard Hats and Hot Topics podcast. We hope you tune into future sessions, and please follow us on LinkedIn and Instagram for upcoming podcasts. And actually, we're going to be doing a breakfast seminar on this very topic very soon. So thank you.